Welcome to our web exclusive. I'm Mike Montecalvo along with Eyewitness News analyst Lieutenant General Reginald Centracchio. And on Thursday of this week, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta will visit Electric Boat in Groton. Kind of, I guess, General, a ceremonial thing. He wants to look at one of the subs, the Mississippi, but they often make these appearances. But he's coming also at a critical time, too.
He is. I wouldn't be surprised that in the back room somewhere he'd be discussing what the potential is of the super committee, which needs to render its report by next Wednesday. I'm not sure that it would have any impact on existing sub construction, but I wouldn't put it past them to look and talk about future possibilities, because this super committee is looking at a pretty drastic reduction in overall defense spending.
Okay, that committee report is expected to come out the day before Thanksgiving. Will things like submarines be targeted, as we've talked about new ways of fighting wars?
Well, existing programs where there's a sub under contract and in production right now, I don't think it'll touch that. But certainly you'll see future production and perhaps renovation of the fleet most certainly affected. You're talking about, tens of billions of dollars, if not somewhere down the road, $1 trillion or more being taken out of the Defense Department. That has to obviously translate to either programs, weapon systems, which is the primary target, and certainly entitlements.
Those of us who have been around a while remember what happened at Quonset Point, in the Navy. If we're looking at this, are we looking at something similar to that with these type of cuts?
Well, we don't have that kind of, with the exception of Newport Navy, we don't have that within the greater Providence area. But I was here and I remember what that did to the overall economy. And I hope we don't see anything like that, because you're talking about large-scale impact on an already challenged economy. But I think you will see weapon systems and perhaps some problem with the Navy Newport.
So if Electric Boat is hit, you're talking about hundreds of jobs lost,
absolutely,
possibly.
Absolutely. And not right now, but in the future years, over the next several 5 to 10 years, you'll see, I believe, a significant reduction in new weapon systems, and obviously that, once again, translates to submarines and state-of-the-art submarines.
Well, General, what's going to come into play is you're going to hear that, well, the troops are coming home from Iraq. We're going to discuss this in a second, and how they might be redeployed and how some local troops are going out, too. But is this part of an economy thing that the administration is looking at and saying, hey, look, the economy is, really in the toilet. We need to make some cuts, so let's start here?
I think what they're doing is looking at what the overall impact will be on the Defense Department as it translates. Once again, I'm using that word translate quite a bit, but I mean that's the only word I have that would be effective insofar as understanding what cuts mean and what it will do. And we're talking about a deficit spending, we're talking about a budget. We're talking about overall cut in spending, as well as raising, in some cases, taxes to hopefully meet a demand that's going to be placed on the United States over the next several years, 5 or 10 years. And that, once again, means that we'll see reductions in the overall Defense Department itself.
General, we haven't heard any specific numbers on how much we would save by getting out of Iraq. Have you heard anything?
No, certainly they were talking about maybe something like several $1 billion a month to stay in Iraq. But at the same time, we need to, and I know we're going to perhaps talk about this a little bit later, but we're not necessarily bringing troops out of uniform. Those troops are being taken out of Iraq to be placed elsewhere for future possibilities.
And we have 2 local troops, by the way, that will be deployed this Saturday, and Afghanistan is obviously a target point.
One of the units will be going to Afghanistan, our helicopter unit, which is the first of the 126 will be deployed into Afghanistan. I'm sorry, it'll be the other way around. Our infantry unit, which is the 143rd, will be going into Afghanistan. The helicopter unit will be going into Kuwait, which will be used for general aviation, which could mean they would be used into Iraq as well as Afghanistan.
How long would they stay there?
1 year.
So now you're hearing about this, we're hearing troops coming home, and now we have 2 local troops going out, and then some that are in Iraq will go into Afghanistan as well.
That's correct. And we have another unit coming back within the next 60 to 90 days. But once again, they're coming out of Iraq to come home for good. But at the same time, these 2 units that we're moving in will not be going to Iraq, but they'll certainly be positioned in Kuwait to be able to take up any possibilities of having to go into Iraq again.
General, it's going to be a difficult time of year to get deployed, especially a few days before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, there is one good note in reference to the 143rd Unit, Company C. Captain Jim Poland will be awarded the Bronze Star with Valor, which is pretty significant. So in as much as no one wants to see anybody deployed, but when you have a bright note to talk about in the midst of all this, this is certainly one. Pretty proud of that soldier, and he earned it back in 2008, and just being awarded to him now.
Okay, congratulations to him. Walter Reed Medical Center, obviously there is going to be a merger there. It seems like everything is happening all at once. This was a good idea to do something like this?
Absolutely. It was part of the BRAC, which is the Base Realignment and Closure program several years ago, where they determined that Bethesda and Walter Reed were redundant and they needed to merge. So now you have the Walter Reed Medical Facility, which is in Maryland, and so in essence it's a merger of two facilities into one, and it's called the Walter Reed Medical Facility now.
The other thing that's really brewing, General, and we're starting to hear that something could happen in the next couple of months, is what's going on with Syria, but also that's going to play a part in what's happening in Iran and their nuclear facilities.
Yep.
They've got a lot of countries now that are turning against them, countries that were supporting them at one time.
Absolutely, and I think the first indication that I see some real good movement in favor of addressing the nuclear problem in Iran is to understand that in the last several days, both Jordan and Turkey and the Arab League itself have come against what is going on with Syria and Assad specifically. I think this, and this is my opinion only, but I know it's been talked about at the cabinet level in Israel. I think this is an opportune time to gain support from the Arab countries, knowing that if Iran procures a nuclear weapon, that would be a devastating possibility for all of the Mideast and specifically Israel. So I think you may see, once again my opinion, you may see a preemptive strike by Israel with the knowledge of the Arab League as well as Jordan and Turkey, because specifically of what's happening in Libya and specifically with Assad.
Now, does President Assad have to get out before any of this happens?
Well, I don't think so. I think so much pressure is going to be put on him. You'll see undoubtedly the same kind of pressure that all of the countries have gone through in the last year or so. There'll be internal pressure from his own people. And I'm sure the United States and other countries are working behind the scenes to try to get him to leave. But if he fails to do that, he'll probably be taken out by his own people, which is exactly what happened with Gaddafi. You
know, you're talking about Turkey and Jordan, for example. You know, they're not saying anything. They're just going to turn and look away if Israel happens to take out those nuclear facilities. That's kind of an endorsement, though, isn't it, by telling them not to do that?
It is, but I think in the long run, you know, they don't have nuclear weapons, and they don't want to be beholden to Iran, which has made it clear. Both Ahmadinejad as well as the Iranian policy is to eliminate Israel. If you unleash a nuclear scenario in that area, Jordan, Turkey, and all of the Mideast countries will be certainly involved in that. So I think they understand you cannot allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon.
And finally, close to home, the Occupy Providence movement, they did get out of Burnside Park for a little while so they can winterize the park. They're expected to be back there. We kind of thought that they might move to a different location, especially now with Thanksgiving and the Christmas season less than a week away. Are you surprised they're going back into that location?
Well, I am, especially in the light of that recently a judge in New York made a decision that you cannot stop them being anyone to go and protest, but you can stop them from setting up tents and setting up small villages because of public safety and sanitation. And I'm surprised that we're going to allow them to go back in with tents. And I think you might see some possible parameters when they do go back in. Maybe you might not see tents, or you may not see tent city as we just saw over the last several months in Providence.
Okay, General, thank you for your thoughts, and thanks for watching.